Good evening everyone, and I'd like to do a demonstration on the new Microsoft Flight Simulator default A320. We've had so many new players come and join our wonderful flight sim world, and many of you I see on the forums on Facebook etc. want to jump straight into the A320 cockpit and fly. Well, the good news is that the default aircraft is much more complicated than we are used to for a default aircraft, and with that in mind it means that there are a few things you need to know regarding piloting the A320. The autopilot in particular is something that needs to be looked after and managed. There are a few bugs involved, but there are ways around it, and that's what I'm hopefully going to show you over the next few minutes. So at the moment we're currently sat at London Heathrow. It's a nice evening, fair weather, it's pretty late, look at that. Okay, and if you're wondering why we've suddenly got red lines all over the navigation display, it's because I'm using the latest mod on the A320 which has been produced, and it's just made a few things a little bit more realistic. So don't worry about that if you haven't got that. It'll start to look a little bit normal in around 1 minute when the IDIAS has aligned itself. So we'll get started in a little moment. What we do need to do is take a look at programming the MCDU, which is the flight computer down here. So in terms of setting up the A320 ready for a flight, loading it up at whatever airport you want to depart from, first thing we need to do is turn on the batteries, after turning on the external power of course, and we also want to turn on our fuel pumps. The other thing we need to do is turn on the navigation lights. That just lets everyone around the aircraft know that there are people there working in it. And if you have got the new mod for the A320, it means you can also now use the seatbelt sign and smoking signs. That one's not yet active, but the seatbelt sign, so you get that nice little ding which we're familiar with, so our passengers can sit down and behave. Looking at that, our GPS has now aligned itself, so we're ready to start having a look at the flight plan that we've got loaded up. Today we're just going to do a routine flights from London Heathrow up to Manchester, and we've got the flight plan just here. So what I'm basically going to do is take you through this flight plan to begin with and show you how to input all the data from this into the flight computer, the MCDU. This flight plan was created using SimBrief. If you're not familiar with that, go and check it out, simbrief.com. It is a fantastic website which gives you very realistic flight plans and all the information you need to use. This actually, my default setting is I normally fly flights with EasyJet flight plans, and I can tell you from experience that this looks exactly like a real EasyJet flight plan with all the data down here, which we'll go through in a little bit later on. So without further ado, let's get started and have a look at putting some information in the MCDU, the Airbus flight computer. So the first thing we see here is just the loading screen. Tells you about the engines, the active database, etc. You don't need to worry about that at all for now. And the first thing we need to have a look at is the Init page, where we initiate the flight. So in here we're going to tell the aeroplane where it's taking off from and where it's going to land. Two very important things obviously. So the first thing we need to do is input the code for London Heathrow. Separate that by a slash, and then we enter the arrival airport, which is Manchester. And that goes up here into the From To page. Once we do that, it'll come up with this screen which basically says that there are no routes already pre-stored in the computer. That's absolutely fine. Hit return. Okay, so now the aeroplane knows where it's going from, where it's going to, but it doesn't yet know how it's going to get there. There's still a couple of things we need to fill in on here as well. So the cost index, if you're not familiar with the cost index, basically that instructs the aeroplane on how fuel efficient to be, basically put on how it's going to climb, and yeah, so you can get that information again from your flight plan. That's this little number here. So tonight's flight we're going to use a cost index of 18, so just pop that in there. So you'll see here we've got a flight level already put in there and the flight temperature. We're going to change that because according to the flight plan it's only a short flight. We're actually going to cruise at 18,000 feet. So the cruise altitude 18,000 feet and the cruise temperature is -12. So I'm going to pop those in here now. And the minus button. There we go. So it now knows the cruise altitude, which we're going to be aiming for. Next thing we need to have a look at is the fuel. So click on the left arrow, as we've just said there, that just moves us on to the next page, and you can see that there are a lot of blank things here which need filling in. So the zero fuel weight, that is basically the weight of the aircraft and the pilots and the passengers and the luggage, everything that's going on the aircraft without its fuel. And again, you get that information from your flight plan, which is just there. So that's quite accurate actually. So it's 58, we can go like 58.0. So we'll type that in. And I know it already says it there, but we're going to type it in anyway, and I'll show you why in a moment. Because after it wants a little bit more information about how the aircraft is loaded. Now, right at the very start, I filled in what you didn't see me do before while I was prepping the video. I filled in the information regarding the payload, so about 17,000 kilograms, 17,061 kilograms, and the fuel that we're going to be taking on today's trip. And the annoying thing at the moment about the loading screen for the new flight simulator is that everything is given in pounds. Well, we like to work in kilograms here in the UK and Europe, as does the Airbus. You can actually change your settings in the SimBrief flight planner when you get online there, but I still keep it in kilograms. So a quick calculation tells me that the payload today is about 37,500 pounds, and the fuel is about 13,300 pounds, roughly speaking, which I've already preloaded in. When you're on the preloading screen, it doesn't show it here. Again, I don't know if that's just a mistake, but when you're on the preloading screen, over this side here, it gives you a center of gravity percentage, which is something you need to note down in the main flight screen once you've loaded all these numbers in. So what the weight and balance of the aircraft tonight is 21.51%. So we need to just type that in as well, 21.51. We pop that in there. So now the aircraft knows how it's balanced with all its fuel and with its passengers, etc. Now there's still a couple of other things we need to add. TOW, that's its takeoff weight, or planned takeoff weight, and LW, the planned landing weight. Again, information that can be found here. Again, I like to keep these. This makes it much easier in kilograms here because you're basically just copying the figures. So the takeoff weight, we'll call it 64.1. Put that in there. There we are, 64.1, and the landing weight should be roughly around 62. We'll round that up, 62.5. Oops. We'll need to remember to pop the slash in there. 62.5. There we go. And a standard taxi fuel burn, it tells you here is about 200. So we can pop that in as that's basically a quick guess as to how much we're going to taxi, and how much fuel we're going to use on the burn for that. So there's the Init page all set up. Next, we're going to move to the performance page. Now, the performance page at the moment isn't perfectly accurate. The Flex 2 temp, which basically means are you going to use full power for taking off, or are you going to use a reduced thrust because you've got a long enough runway and the weather's pretty decent, the wind's on your side. For now, we tend to just use full power, which in Airbus terms is called TOGA, or take off and go around thrust. So we don't need to worry too much about that at the moment, as it's not modelled properly yet in the default A320. However, when more accurate add-ons come onto the market, it's always good practice to start using to get into the habit of using this. So we're going to tell it that we're going to use flaps 1 for takeoff, which is pretty standard, and normally you have to work out the trim setting that you're going to be flying at. This again isn't modelled yet at the moment, so we can leave it at 0. So basically we tell it we're going to use flaps 1, and we're going to trim up or down. It really doesn't make any difference at the moment because it's not modelled, so I'll stick with up. So flaps 1, and we're going to trim up 0.0. So basically we're not going to touch the trim wheel at all, as it doesn't make that much difference. Transition altitude, usually in America, the USA, it's 18,000 feet. I think at London Heathrow it's much lower than the 10,000 that's given there. So I'm just going to change that to 6,000. You can get that if you're a subscriber to Navigraph. You can get it off the charts, what the transition altitude is there. Now you'll see up here it says runway. Well, we haven't told it yet which runway we're going to depart from. That is going to be what we do next. So click on the flight plan, and that's it. We've only got 2 waypoints in our flight plan at the moment, from London Heathrow and arriving at Manchester. Decel, the deceleration point, that's popped in there automatically. That is the stage at which the airplane thinks that it should be starting to enter its landing mode. A little bit more about that later. So first thing we need to do is start to input the data as to which runway we're going to use to take off, and after we take off, where are we going to fly to. So let's bring up the flight plan again. So all the information is given to us just there with our route. Starts just here, London Heathrow, runway 27 right, which is good because where I'm parked it's the runway directly behind me, so it's a nice short taxi. Flight level 180, and then the SID, or Standard Instrument Departure. This is basically the route that the aircraft is going to take to get onto the airways to take us up to Manchester. And then we're going to go via the waypoint UMLAT, then the airway T418 up to WELIN, airway 420 up to Trent, and then we've got our STAR, Standard Terminal Arrival route into Manchester. And I will tell you now, this is wrong, because it's for some reason it was set to arrive at Manchester runway 23 left. We're not going to arrive on runway 23 left at all. Aircraft never arrive on 23 left. It doesn't have an ILS. They always use 23 right at Manchester, so we will change that. Anyway, I'm going to go about showing you now how to put this information into the MCDU. So first thing to do is to tell it which runway we're going to fly from. So select London Heathrow, click departure, and here's the list of the runways. If you're at a bigger airport, of course there'll be more than 4. Just use the up and down arrows to scroll through. So we want to select runway 27 right, and then it asks, well, which standard instrument departure do you want to use? And as is the UMLAT 1 Foxtrot, which we're going to have to search for. There it is down at the bottom. Then it's entered. Once it's entered there, click insert. And it already then populates the first few waypoints into the flight computer for us. And you'll notice it ends at UMLAT, which was our first waypoint, or the first waypoint that we were going to enter before we get onto the airways. So now we're going to go and enter the airways and the routing into the flight computer. It's worth mentioning at the moment that this bit isn't modelled particularly well. It does not have airways just yet, as we'll probably find out in a minute when I try and enter them in. So it's telling me that from UMLAT we want to take the T418 airway. So in order to pop that in, click on UMLAT, then come down here to airways. Incidentally, if your flight plan that you're going to enter hasn't got an airway there and it just says DCT, which stands for direct, you wouldn't then bother going to the airways. You just pop in the name of the next waypoint, which in this case would be WELIN, type it in, and then press this button here to enter it as the next waypoint. But ours tells us allegedly we should be taking the T418 airway, so click airways and type it in, T. And then she'll click that here. Now it's actually come up this time. A lot of the times nothing happens when you click that, but you then just move on to the next waypoint, which is WELIN. Now the waypoints get entered at this side. Airways on the left, waypoints on the right. Let's pop WELIN in there. Here we go. Now watch this. There's a good chance that this will disappear in a moment. There we go. It changed to direct because as I say, the airways aren't really correctly modelled at the moment. So that's going to take us directly from UMLAT to WELIN. The next airway should be T420. So we'll pop that in. So it's popped it in this time, and after that we're going up to Trent, which is TNT. Pop that in the waypoint side, and see, look at this, it's actually changed the name of the airway there to N57. I don't know what that is, but it's not in our flight plan, but never mind. So you can see then after Trent we've got this one here, Dane to Alpha. Well, all waypoints are only 5 characters long. If they're longer than that, chances are that they are the SID or the star, the arrival route or the departure route. If you have a look at our departure route, it was UMLAT with 1 F at the end, and Dane is a fix in itself. We've just not popped that in. It's Dane to Alpha, so that will be our star. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to pop that in to the computer yet, and I'll tell you why. It's because usually if you pop that in now, then you could set off, you could fly, and that's great. But if you're flying with live air traffic control on VATSIM for something, for example, then there's a good chance they could change your star as you approach the airport if traffic is busy, or they decide not to use a star at all and just give you vectors straight into the airport via the ILS. So we'll not put the star in just yet. We'll wait until we get into the air, and then we'll add that. So that is all the information popped in there. So if we hit return and have a scroll through, there we go. We've got our 2 waypoints, Trent, and then at the moment the aeroplane thinks we're going to fly directly from Trent to Manchester. Of course that's not the case, because we're going to add in our star in a little bit. Alright, so that is the flight plan set up. Our performance is set up. We've initiated all that data and filled in this page. So now we just need to get the aircraft ready for pushback taxi, starting the engines. One thing I will mention is this thrust reduction altitude. That's normally between, I think it's 1,000 or 1,500 feet above the ground level of the airport. What that means is it's the way that the auto throttle works in the Airbus. You don't need to touch that, but it will become important in a little while as we take off. So what I am going to do now is just to show you how you can flick through the route on the map to check that you've popped everything in correctly. So just bear with me 1 minute. I'm still learning all the hotkeys to get the views where I want them to go. Okay, so you can look on here, and if we turn this knob here and move it to the plan mode, and if you scroll down, you can see in a moment, trying to get the view of the MCDU and the plan in there at once. If you move down now, look, you'll see it moves through all the different waypoints that we've entered, finally ending up at Manchester. So what I'm not going to do is show you the whole taxi to the runway, because that's boring, you don't want to watch that. What I will do though is quickly show you a couple of things as to how to get the aircraft ready. First thing you need to do is, before we go any further, we've got the navigation lights on already. External power is still connected. We've already turned on the fuel pumps and the batteries. Before we start the engines or anything like that, beacon lights on, wing lights on, and you then start the APU, the auxiliary power unit. Without that, you're not going to be able to start the engines. Once this turns green and says that it's available, we then turn on the APU bleed, allowing the air into the engines, at which point we turn the engine mode selector, ready to start the engines. Now I think I read somewhere that for the Neo, don't worry about this, for the Neo I think you meant to start engine 1 first. Someone can correct me if that's wrong. Well, let's just wait and see. Have we got the APU ready just yet? Not just yet, that's still warming up. In fact, do we have the APU page working here? You see the exhaust gas temperature is starting to climb, so it won't be long before we've got power to the APU. Still waiting on power to the APU. If you've not got the A320 mod that's out, this actually starts a lot faster. However, the mod has made it more realistic. It's not that quick to start. Neither do the engines either. The Neo engines take much longer to start than the normal A320 engines. So I'm still waiting for that to begin. Whilst that's doing that, I might as well take you through the dots and dashes. Basically, the autopilot in the Airbus is not the same as a Boeing, certainly not the same as Cessna or anything like that. There are two modes, managed mode and your mode, basically. In managed mode, you are letting the aircraft decide what is best. So if you set an altitude of 5,000 feet and enter managed mode, the aircraft will decide how many feet per minute to climb based on the current situation for fuel efficiency and the cost index that you put in right at the start. Same with the speed. If it's dots and dashes, it's in managed mode, meaning the aircraft will decide which is the best speed. And the heading bug, if that is in managed mode, that will just follow your plan here. To take it out of the managed mode, all you need to do is pull, and then you can select whatever you want. A simple way of thinking this is you either push control to the aircraft or you pull control away from the aircraft so that you're in charge of what the autopilot does and not the aircraft. However, we're going to leave it all in managed mode for now. Is that APU fired up yet? Oh yep, there we go, it's available. So turn on the APU bleed, which means now we shall be able to start the engines. Starting with engine 1. Of course, in real life you would wait for pushback and clearance before starting the engines. I'm being a bit naughty here. And we'll wait for that to fire up. Start engine 2 in the same way, and then I'm going to push back, taxi, and then we'll do the takeoff. That will be in the next video, so I shall see you shortly.